Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this online service of Quimper Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, a loving, spirited, and ever more inclusive community. Whoever you are, wherever you're from, whomever you love, whatever your faith tradition, you are welcome here. My name is Dan Brooks, and I'm a member here at QUUF, and I'd like to begin this service by acknowledging the water, land, and shorelines here in Port Townsend that are the traditional territories of the Sklallam and Chemakum peoples. We honor and acknowledge our indigenous members and neighbors and vow to help restore and sustain their homelands. In a moment, we'll light the chalice, but first, let us settle our minds and enter this moment with the ringing of the chime. It is good to be together. And now we will have our musical call to community.
Guide my feet while I run this race. Guide my feet while I run this race. Guide my feet while I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain. Hold my hand while I run this race. Hold my hand while I run this race. Hold my hand while I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain. Race in vain. Stand by me while I run this race. Stand by me while I run this race. Stand by me while I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain. Race in vain. Search my heart while I run this race. Search my heart while I run this race. Search my heart while I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain. Race in vain.
Thank you, that was wonderful. It is now time for our chalice lighting ritual. Please join me and our guest speaker, Julia Cochrane, in our chalice lighting words. They were written by Emily Sinclair Montague from her article, The Burden of Radical Compassion in an Angry World. To fulfill our duty, we have to embrace the intense discomfort that accompanies true, boundary-breaking empathy. This is not an exercise that comes easily. Accepting that we, the undeniably privileged, are responsible for preserving global empathy is a complex endeavor. Thank you. Our opening words are by Adam Smith in his book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments. Pronouns have been modified for a more current structure of sympathy. How selfish soever a person may be supposed, there are evidently some principles in their nature which interest them in the fortune of others and render their happiness necessary to them, though derive nothing from it except the pleasure of seeing it. Of this kind is compassion, the emotion which we feel for the misery of others when we see it, or are made to conceive it in a very personal manner. That we often derive sorrow from the sorrow of others is a matter of fact too obvious to require any instance to prove it. For this sentiment, like all of the original passions of human nature, is by no means confined to the virtuous and humane, though they perhaps feel it with the most exquisite sensibility. The greatest ruffian, the most hardened violator of the laws of society, is not altogether without it. What we'd like to do now is acknowledge and welcome those of you who are visiting us this morning. You are invited to say hello in the comments section and tell us your name and where you're from. The chat section can be found below or on the right of your screen of the video when it is out of full screen. We'd love to hear from you. We also hope that you will join us in our virtual coffee hour in our Fellowship Hall Zoom room. If you don't have that link, it will be posted in the chat section at the end of the service. If you find this service useful or inspirational, hopefully both, please share the link with your friends and family. So welcome everyone, and we are glad you are with us today. I have one quick announcement today. If you haven't done so, this is our last reminder to submit photos for our August 8th Blessing of the Animal service. Please send your photos with your pets, or better yet, photos with your pets, to selfie@QUUF.org. Please specify if the photo is a living pet or one you are memorializing. Thank you. We will now receive the offering. The money we raise today will go to the ministerial discretionary fund. If you are a member who is experiencing housing insecurity, please let Kate know. These funds are there to help you. If you would like to donate today, you have three options. Text the amount you'd like to give to the number now showing at the bottom of the screen. Go to our website, QUUF.org, and click the giving link, or simply mail a check to QUUF. Remember to put Ministerial Discretionary Fund in the memo line. We will now gratefully receive your offering as we listen to Harmony by Jim Scott, performed by Pat Rodgers on piano. Thank you, Pat. We will now share our joys and sorrows, recognizing that our personal joys and sorrows are only a fragment of the joys and sorrows of the larger community of life. And thus we place the first stone, thinking in particular of everyone around the country who was impacted by the tragic death of member Stan Cummings. Please note that his memorial service will take place online later today at 3 p.m. The link was included in the e-blast on the Friday update. It will also be placed in the chat now. And now, within the congregation, we light a candle of hope and health for Kirit Bonsali, who was our guest speaker last week. Kirit will undergo knee replacement surgery this next week, which is never easy. It's made even more difficult if you are the primary caregiver of your spouse. So if you can help Kirit out in any way, including meals, please contact our pastoral care co-chair, Sarah Walker. If you don't have her address, just call the office. We light a candle for Joyce Francis and Niels Pedersen celebrating their 25th wedding anniversary with a renewal of vows on Tuesday. And also, we light a candle for Catherine McNabb and Joanna England, who both celebrated their birthdays on July 16th. Happy birthday, Catherine and Joanna. And also for Lloyd Westbrook, who celebrated his birthday on July 23rd. Happy birthday, Lloyd. We light a candle in honor of Julia's mother, Pauline Bourget Cochrane, who would have turned 99 yesterday, July 24th, if she hadn't have died 30 years ago from breaking the glass ceiling. And one for Brian Rodgers, whose birthday is today. Happy birthday, Brian. And last but not least, we light a candle for Henry Amick, whose birthday is tomorrow. You should note that the flowers today were given in his honor. And now we place a final stone, holding in our hearts the joys and sorrows I've just shared, but also thinking of such joys and sorrows among us that are unexpressed, but of no less importance. I invite you now into a moment of silence.
My reading is from Cast by Isabel Wilkerson. Empathy is not sympathy. Sympathy is looking across at someone and feeling sorrow, often in times of loss. Empathy is not pity. Pity is looking down from above and feeling a distant sadness for another in their misfortune. Empathy is commonly viewed as putting yourself in someone else's shoes and imagining how you would feel. That could seem as a start, but it's little more than role-playing, and it's not enough in the ruptured world we live in. Radical empathy, on the other hand, means putting in the work to educate yourself and to listen with a humble heart, to understand another's experience from their perspective, not as we imagine we would feel. Radical empathy is not about you and what you think you would do in a situation you've never been in and perhaps never will. It is the kindred connection from a place of deep knowing that opens your spirit to the pain of another as they perceive it.
I cannot sleep,
No puedo dormir,
thinking of the children
pensando de las niñas
who cannot sleep
que no pueden dormir,
on the supperless to bed.
pues no tienen que comer.
I cannot sleep,
Dormir no puedo,
thinking of the young ones
pensando de los
who
niños
roam the road,
sin un hogar
no place to lay their head.
donde descansar.
If there were one,
Si fuera uno,
would be cause to wonder.
sería cosa que pensar.
If there were one,
Si fuera una,
would be cause to weep.
darían ganas de llorar.
But they are numbered
Pero no es una,
into many thousands,
sino que son miles.
and for each one
Y por cada uno
I cannot sleep.
no puedo dormir. Los almacenes
Stores are full,
llenos de alimento
bins are overflowing,
y frente a ellos
sight of food,
niños hambrientos van
hungry children wait,
mientras la línea
out on the street,
son cada día más largas
lines are getting long,
y en el hogar
'cause it all
no hay nada que comer.
nothing on the plate.
Si fuera uno,
There were one,
sería cosa que pensar.
would be cause to wonder.
Si fuera una,
There were one,
darían ganas de llorar.
would be cause to weep.
Pero no es una,
They are numbered
sino que son miles.
into many thousands.
Por cada uno
For each one,
no puedo dormir.
I cannot sleep. We will not sleep,
No dormiremos,
my brothers from the city.
hermanos de la ciudad.
We will not sleep,
No dormiremos,
my sisters from the plow,
hermanas de los campos,
till we have shared
hasta lograr
the wealth we have created.
la riqueza compartir
And there is food
entre
for
aquellos
those who hunger now.
que hambre tienen ya.
There were one,
Si fuera uno,
would be cause to wonder.
sería cosa que pensar.
If there were
Si
one,
fuera una,
would be cause to weep.
darían ganas de llorar.
But
Pero
they
no
are
es
numbered into many thousands. Y
Today, our speaker is Julia Cochrane, who has been a member of QUUF for about a quarter of a century, since our first service in the current fellowship hall. Julia has been active in many different ways over the years at QUUF, including a rather constant involvement with the various teams of the Social and Environmental Justice Council. The title of today's sermon is, What Motivates My Activism?
Good morning. Since my talk is about activism, I should feel I should define what I mean by activism. Oxford defines activism as the policy or action of using vigorous campaigning to bring about political or social change. My grandmother, who had 6 brothers, was born in 1886, was the only member of her family to go to college. As a single mom of 2 kids, she had a government career in Washington, D.C., while a boarding house and family in Rochester, New York raised her kids. Her life caused change. My mother graduated college and went on to be the first woman on a Fortune 500 company board who is not an heiress or a widow. I view my mother as an activist. Her life, her career, which included co-founding New York Now and the Women's Political Caucus, caused change. I'm not sure that activism requires people to think of themselves or call themselves activists. If the way you live your life causes change in the institutions and society around you, then you are an activist. I have been and called myself an activist most of my life. I was always involved with the unsheltered and immigrants, people looking for safety and a place to sleep unafraid. My activism with the peace movement was helping people get out of the military during Vietnam, helping people find safety from violence and war, helping women and children escape domestic violence, helping people connect with resources that would give them food, clothing, and a home. Helping people find safety, one way or another, has been my activism. During the pandemic, as I tried to encourage my community to see the most marginalized, I found myself sounding like a preacher. I started asking what the difference was between me and the unsheltered in open public meetings. I did a small amount of math based on an NPR story about Spokane and started saying that given the statistics of people behind in house payments, rent or mortgage in Spokane, that we, Jefferson County, could be looking at 1,500 households losing their homes, with possibly 500 of these households ending up on our streets and in our woods. And most recently, I've come up with a comparison between the fairgrounds and their North Beach neighbors. We all know if a tsunami happened, we as a community would rush to house our neighbors on the first night in some large heated public building with bathrooms. So what's the difference between people in a climate emergency and the emergency that the people at the fairgrounds experience every day? Why do some people deserve shelter and not others? And which class am I? These words are a part of my activism and have consumed me during these past 18 months. And I started looking back with the help of a counselor and asking why. What is that motivation? What is that compulsion? I will share some of these reasons with you today in the hope that you can look back into your own experiences and find that passion within you. All my life, I've felt compelled to use what resources I have, internal and external, to help people who didn't even have a safe place to call home. It started with the people living on the streets around my childhood home at 90th and West End in New York City. I think I was 5 or 6 when I started handing people money or putting it in their pocket if they were asleep. I was a fairly wealthy child who always had a cab fare home in my shoe. The day before my 11th birthday, I put a bill in the pocket of the person asleep on the steps of my private parochial school and discovered he was frozen. He was dead. For a while, I stepped back, but by the time I was 14 and part of the newly found National Organization for Women, I started buying time from similarly aged street workers on Houston Street. I would give them whatever they made in an hour, and the time was theirs to use. Sometimes I'd buy them lunch and we would talk. And from then on, there's been a steady relationship with people needing safe space. At 19, I was living in Vancouver, British Columbia, and invited a young street worker to come live with me and my partner. I'd often talk with her about her reality. She wanted out. And then one day she was gone. Found out that the man she worked for had kidnapped and killed her with a heroin overdose. It took me 5 years before I gave a home to another young woman. This time I met her in the Army. She was an abusive supply sergeant's daughter, and even though only 14, the girlfriend of one of the GIs I shared an off-post house with. Her parents met when he was on duty in France. Her French-speaking mother was completely controlled by her dad. I managed to convince the Missouri courts to allow me to have custody of her. That story had a happy ending. Some of the kids who've lived with me came from the streets, were unsheltered before finding my house. Some were in difficult or impoverished family situations. In Ohio, I took care of a 14-year-old genius college student for several years. Back in New York, I took home subway kids. They were very young because they had to be shorter than me for my safety. I basically gave them a 3-day vacation to decide if they wanted to go back to the subways with their family or into New York's overwhelmed bureaucracy. Or sometimes I found a foster home for them through various Brooklyn churches. In Jefferson County, there have been 39 young people who lived in my house, most of whom I had some form of guardianship for. It has been a long journey involving street workers, chronically homeless, homeless youth, and immigrants, all needing somewhere safe that they can be. What was that initial motivation? It's a question I've been asking myself pretty constantly in the last couple of years as my housing has become endangered, and I'm once again dealing with PTSD. It is clear what drives me is the deep empathy I've always felt for people who did not have a safe place to be. I did not have safety for the first 7 years of my life, and off and on afterwards. I've had times when I never relaxed, for months. I know what that feels like. I see it in the eyes of some of the women in the shelter and at the fairgrounds. I had learned to use pain as an energizer, and now I'm learning to keep that focus even without the pain. I believe the particular focus on the unsheltered began with my uncle, who I loved, sometimes lived with, and who fathered me from 8 on. He started drinking at 17 after being shot in the head at Iwo Jima and killing a man who was about to bayonet him. For 30 years, he drank from morning till night. There was always whiskey in his cup. Then he stopped on a Father's Day, and 7 years later died. I have memories of seeing him on the park benches, looking over the Hudson, talking with other men who called the benches home. I knew some of these people well. Sometimes they came home with him. I don't think I understood why they did not have homes, but I knew money helped. It seemed to help everyone. When he moved to Greenwich Village, I would meet up with my uncle at the chess tables in Washington Square Park. Often after playing with someone, he'd palm them a $20 bill as they shook hands. I knew these were street people, even though some of them were more kempt than I am. I grew to know that my uncle was what we now call paying it forward, that this was his hedge against fate. Later, during my high school years, he lost his wife and kids because of alcohol. He almost lost me. A few times I'd see him hanging out on the streets of the Upper West Side. He gave his wife his apartment and lived in an abandoned warehouse. At the same time I was being immersed in my Catholic faith, I learned about saints and people who spent their lives in service to others, in particular about Father Damien, who worked for 16 years in Hawaii, providing comfort for the lepers of Kalaupapa, Hawaii. He gave the people not only faith, but also homes and medical and emotional support. I wanted to do what he did. I wanted my life to be about helping other people have a safe space to be. I became an architect, believing that could make a difference. Architecture turned out to be a strange path. I enjoyed construction structures, but my dreams of actually making affordable housing that was more welcoming and abundant could not grab hold of any possible reality. I was floundering inside. When working on the Philip Morris building, at the end of the job, when I was punch listing the 6,000 rooms, I came across the oddest thing that showed me the ugliness of that world. That building had 3 dining levels for employees. The file clerks, mail people, janitors, etc., got to eat 3 stories underground, looking at a mural of what the executive dining room looked out on from the top floor. Opening day, a door of the lower level dining room was being held open by the statue of a very short black man. I saw how the black employees looked at it, found the owner's rep, and asked him what that was about. He told me that was a statue of Johnny, the Negro dwarf, who was the voice for the radio campaign calling Philip Morris. I told him I thought the black employees were insulted by it. And would Johnny want his statue holding open a door? So the statue disappeared, and I became less enchanted with architecture. During the same period of time, I had a small group of friends who considered themselves radical housers. We came up with a name and a mission. We called ourselves Toxin, T-O-C-S-I-N, tenants organized to create safe and inhabited neighborhoods. Our mission was to retake abandoned buildings warehoused by the city and use New York City's housing laws to turn them from squats to homesteads. We worked with established nonprofits and a team of lawyers. One of us died organizing the homeless into a union that now exists. And here and there we succeeded. Once we rehabbed the building enough to welcome others to occupy it, I tended to deal with the tenants most affected by mental illness and the children. That seemed to be my specialty. There was a man who did not speak at all. When we first brought him to the room that would be his, I sat with him for a bit. I sat on the one chair and he sat on the edge of his bed. The only other thing in the room was a small dresser. Every once in a while, he would get up and open the window, sit down again, and eventually get up and close it. He also did this with the door, over and over again. I was watching someone who had not had a window to open or a door to close for a very long time. It felt good over time to see him start to relax. One young girl in particular caught my attention. We became friends. She lived with her dad in a building that we fought the city for years. When we lost the building and people went back on the streets, her dad pimped her. I wanted to take her in and raise her, but he needed the money she brought in and wouldn't let go. It broke my heart. I never saw street people, the homeless, the addicts, the drunks, the mentally ill, the sex workers, the sex offenders, as other. I always saw them as someone's beloved family member, even if they scared me. I knew there was a struggle, a history, that caused them to be outside. I knew that the way they lived was not comfortable and nice like my home, and that being homeless wasn't fun. It wasn't what they wanted to grow up and be. One of the last youth I was guardian for in Port Townsend was my foster son. He had been raised in various foster families since he was 5, and twice had families that sexually abused him, which is how he came to live with me. He was developmentally delayed in that he could not separate himself from being a child and totally lacked the maturity of his biological age. I couldn't take him to foster family type events because if he played with younger kids, like tag, he would get as intense as they were, but he was twice their size. Right about when he turned 18, he touched a young girl inappropriately. I insisted that he get charged because I wanted to make sure that he would never do that again. So he spent a small time in our local jail, was required to see a counselor that specialized in sex offenders, and has not been stable or in adequate housing since then. That was an unintended consequence. I did manage to get his record expunged so that now he might find a nice place to live. I don't believe that by ostracizing low-level sex offenders, we're helping anyone. For any healing to happen, one needs the basic requirements of life, housing, food, safety. The reason I'm sharing this is because I think one of the privileges I grew up with was a family that supported my dreams, whatever they were. I was never told to stop wasting my time on hopeless others and to focus on my own future. I think children want to help, but are often told that they can't help, or that those that they want to help are hopeless, undeserving, or dangerous. I think we shut down our best instincts in order to focus on how not to end up like them. I somehow missed that lesson. With this belief comes a belief that there is a passion in each of us to make the world a better place somehow. Some of us focus on this beautiful green and blue world. Some focus on the other forms of life, the animal kingdom. But in all of us is that drive to make things better, if we only allow ourselves to feel it. For me, paying attention to the health and welfare of those humans around me is that passion. Not just imagining walking in their shoes, but knowing there is nowhere they are welcome to just hang out, sit down, be warm and dry, be served, for many, many people. Here we've had a stream of compassionate businesses: the Boiler Room, the Winter Welcoming Center, and now Recovery Cafe. All these efforts take volunteers and money. But to create systemic change, we need a deeper relationship than just givers of charity. We need to understand what Lila Watson meant by her famous words. If you've come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come because your liberation is bound with mine, then let us work together. Work with your fellow QUUF members to allow a couple people to be safe on our grounds in a residential safe car park. Help build tiny wooden shelters to offer a safe place to sleep behind a door that locks. Place benches around the community that someone could lie down on. Volunteer to make things possible with the Housing Solutions Network. Get to know your unhoused neighbors by having lunch on Thursday at the Recovery Cafe or on Tuesday at the Episcopal Church. Reach out to the families who no longer have homes, some of which are in and on the edges of our congregation. Open your houses and hearts to those with less privilege. Any answer, any solution you can think of during these times of rapidly increasing inequity is a yes and. We need all the answers, all the solutions. Please don't stare in indifference or fear from the sidelines. Engage as your faith asks you to. If you believe in the inherent worth and dignity of each person, how can you not engage? Thank you. Our closing hymn today is hymn 121, We'll Build a Lamb.
More
Before we extinguish our chalice, I want to remind you that Kathy Stevenson will be our guest speaker next Sunday. She will be speaking on her life as a Unitarian Universalist. I hope you can join us. And now, let us join voices in our chalice extinguishing words. We extinguish our flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of the community, the fire of commitment, or the power of transformation. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. After the service, I hope you'll join us for our virtual coffee hour. During our Zoom coffee hour, Julie has offered to be available to discuss advocacy in Jefferson County. If you would like to be part of that discussion, just let Christina know when you first join the coffee hour. Those of you who would like to participate in our normal coffee hour with hosts facilitating personal check-ins, as well as reflection questions on the sermon topic, we still have that option. I hope to see you there. But first, let us turn our attention to our postlude.
Sometimes in our lives, we all have pain, we all have sorrow. If we are wise, we know that there's always tomorrow.
Lean on me when you're not strong. I'll be your friend. I'll help you carry on. Oh, it won't be long. You're gonna need somebody to lean on. Please swallow your pride. If I have things you need to borrow, or no one can fill those are your needs that you won't let show. You just call on your brother when you need a hand. We all need somebody to lean on. You just might have a problem that you don't understand.